Hispanic, and I just want to talk about, voting and a couple of misconceptions and demographics. And I'm just going to get straight to it, all right? First thing first, I'm going to talk about the demographics here in the U.S. This only applies to the U.S., so that's what I'm going to talk about. Here in the U.S., the population is consisted of 77% white Americans. 77%. I'm going to say it again. The U.S. population here in America is comprised of 77% white Americans. So that leaves you with 23% left. Of that 23%, 13% of it are personnel who are black and or African American. Black and or African American is 13%. So obviously that leaves you 10%. Of that 10%, that whole 10% is comprised of people who are Alaskan natives, Native Americans, Asians, Pacific Islanders, and personnel who are two or more races. I'm gonna repeat it. It consists of Alaskan natives, Native Americans, Asians, Pacific Islanders, and personnel who are two or more races. Now you're gonna notice that I didn't say Hispanic and Latinos, because Hispanics by definition is more characterized based on culture per se. The way the US census.gov website has it broken down, they describe being a Hispanic more or less as a culture, referring to people who are like, specifically from Spain or an ancestor of someone from Spain. And a lot of personnel don't describe themselves that way. In fact, many Hispanics either classify themselves as being white or, Afro-Latino, in other words, black. And some don't classify themselves as either. So when you look at the census.gov website, you're going to see on one spectrum, Hispanics are, supposedly make up 60% of the population because they identify as white. And on the other end, you're going to see ones who don't identify with any particular race. They're going to consider themselves to be like 18% of the population. So that there is not calculated into 23% because it'll give you inaccurate numbers. So to get back to what I was just saying, 77% of the population is white Americans, and then you got 13% personnel who are black and or African American, and the other 10% is all comprised of personnel who are Alaskan natives, Asian Pacific Islanders, Asians and Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, and personnel who are two or more races. So what does this have anything to do with the election? Well, if minorities were on code and wanted a particular person to be the president, they would have to rely on 28% of support from white Americans to vote for the same person. So in other words, there's no way a minority will be able to determine who's the president without having at least 28% of support from white Americans. So in other words, white Americans determine who the president is. A lot of people don't realize it, a lot of people don't want to accept it, but white Americans are the ones who determine who the president is, and they've been determining who the president is for a long time because they've been the majority of the population since this country has been successfully established. On the flip side of that though, that means minorities will be the ones who determine the tiebreaker, because since they're a smaller number, they will be the ones who kind of separate the two parties or whatever. This is based off a two-party system, just basic Democrat and Republicans. That's not adding in, Green Party, Libertarian. We just focusing on two parties here, because if we add those other parties, the numbers will be smaller. Now, on another note also, a lot of people in the past have said hey, we want to do away with the electoral voting system and do with the popular vote system. And I get why people want to do that, because the last election in 2016, President Trump did not win the popular vote. He won the electoral votes in the areas where obviously it mattered the most. If minorities were to go for that and switch it to a popular vote system, minorities may never get their voices heard. They might not ever get their voices heard, because here in America, with white Americans being the determining factor, being the majority, whatever they vote for, that'll pretty much be it. So it's kind of cool to have that redlining and gerrymandering type system with the electoral voting system, because it offsets and allows the smaller groups to have an opportunity to be heard. If they don't do that, that means African Americans, Latinos, not Latinos, but African Americans, Asians, Pacific Islanders, Native Alaskans, and people who are 2 or more races may never get their voices heard. So all this other stuff that people been telling y'all about, you didn't vote, that's why we didn't win, and all that nonsense, is basic mathematics. Just look at the numbers, and the numbers speak for themselves. And that's my 2 cents. Have a nice day.